Claire Hartman arrived in the sleepy coastal town of Graybrier with nothing but two suitcases, a half-dead phone, and the weight of something she couldn't quite name pressing at the base of her spine. The sun hung low behind a curtain of fog, casting a honeyed glow over the winding cobblestone streets and salt-stained shutters. It was the kind of town people wrote poems about, picturesque, still, quiet. Too quiet. Her new apartment sat at the edge of town, nestled in a weather-worn Victorian house that had been carved into 4 units. Hers was Unit 4B, top floor, ocean-facing. The real estate photos had promised charm, character, and a touch of seaside mystery. What they hadn't captured was how the house breathed, its walls groaning softly like they remembered voices. Or how the rustling wind outside sometimes sounded like it was whispering her name. Mrs. Redford, the landlord, was already waiting when Claire arrived. A thin, sharp-featured woman in her 60s, with hair like brittle smoke and eyes that didn't blink enough. Her handshake was cold, her smile practiced. "You'll be very comfortable here," she said, her voice syrupy but somehow hollow. "You look familiar." Claire didn't respond, unsure whether to be flattered or unnerved. She followed Mrs. Redford through the creaking staircase, noting the faded floral wallpaper, the antique mirrors hanging at angles, and the way the air grew colder with each step upward. The apartment was small but beautiful in a way that felt intentional, staged, almost. Hardwood floors scuffed by generations, crown moldings crusted with old paint, and a large bay window overlooking the restless sea. The closet, oddly deep for such an old place, sat in the farthest corner of the bedroom. Claire barely noticed it at first. The door was slightly ajar, and the darkness inside looked deeper than it should have. As she unpacked her things, she told herself this was her fresh start. A place to breathe, to write, to forget. But as the day faded into a pale, lavender dusk and the house settled around her, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Not in the apartment. Not even in her own skin. Downstairs, Mrs. Redford stood by the front window, watching the upper floor. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a tarnished brass key, one that no longer fit any lock in the house, and whispered, "She's finally come home." The storm had rolled in sometime after midnight, thunder low and distant like a warning, wind whistling through the ancient eaves of the house like a song only the walls could understand. Claire had tossed and turned all night, haunted by half-formed dreams, flickers of firelight, the sound of a child sobbing, a sharp scent of burning wood. Morning came reluctantly. The sky was a flat gray, the sea beyond the bay window churned with white foam, and the apartment felt colder than it should have, like someone had left a window open. But they hadn't. Claire padded into the bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes, only to stop dead in her tracks. The closet door, which she remembered closing, was now wide open. Inside stood a mannequin. It was nearly life-sized, pale as bone, with a fine network of hairline cracks running across its porcelain face. It wore a child's dress, Victorian, maybe, faded blue lace and pearl buttons, torn at one shoulder and stained with something dark near the hem. In its right hand, it held a scorched, one-eyed doll with its mouth sewn shut. Claire's heart thudded once, violently. Her breath caught. She didn't scream. Not yet. Not until she blinked, once, twice, and the mannequin was still there. Just as before, head slightly tilted like it was listening. She backed away, panic rising like bile in her throat. Had someone broken in during the night? A prank? Some sick joke? But she'd locked the door. She always locked the door. The idea of someone entering her apartment quietly enough to leave that thing. It chilled her to the marrow. She dragged it down the stairs herself, despite how stiff and awkward its limbs were, like they resisted. Tossed it into the dumpster behind the building. Didn't look back. But the next morning, it was back. Standing exactly where it had been. Only now. The doll's head was turned. And the mannequin's eyes, once dull and expressionless, seemed just slightly more focused. Over the next days, Claire tried everything. She hurled it off the cliff behind the house into the ocean, smashed it with a crowbar, locked it in the building's basement crawlspace, burned it. But each time, no matter what she did, it returned. Sometimes within hours. Always to the closet. always standing just a little different. One hand raised, one foot turned inward. The doll, in one instance, mysteriously gone. And each time, the feeling intensified that she was being watched, not just by the mannequin, but by the apartment itself. The air seemed to thrum with awareness. Her dreams grew darker, harder to shake. She stopped opening the closet, stopped sleeping in the bedroom. Paranoia began to bleed into her waking life. She jumped at reflections, at passing cars, at the sound of footsteps in the hall. She caught herself whispering apologies to the closet door as she passed. The worst part wasn't that the mannequin kept coming back. It was that part of her, some deeper, buried part, recognized it. Claire hadn't expected warmth from the sleepy coastal town of Narrow's End, but the hospitality felt manufactured. The neighbors were kind enough, sure, but it was all too much. Too many pies delivered with tight smiles, too many casual questions about how she's settling in, too many eyes that lingered when they thought she wasn't looking. Every time she brought up the mannequin, people froze. Smiles faltered. Phrases like probably just your imagination or oh, you poor dear, moving is so stressful, became as common as the gulls overhead. But something didn't add up. She started asking about her apartment, specifically Unit 4B. That was when the change became unmistakable. People stopped responding altogether. Some excused themselves mid-sentence. Others changed the subject with the subtle panic of someone avoiding a landmine. Then she heard it. Whispers, just barely audible, as she passed a fish stall at the harbor market. She's in 4B. Again? No one stays long. Never remembers. The curse always finds its way back. Claire froze. When she turned, the stall owner, an elderly man with milky eyes and fish guts on his apron, pretended not to have said anything. He smiled too widely and offered her a free mackerel. That night, Claire found an excuse to visit the building's oldest tenant, Mrs. Elspeth Morwenna, who lived in 1A. The others had warned her Elspeth was a little touched, but Claire needed answers. The old woman's apartment smelled of dried herbs and liniment. The walls were cluttered with mismatched clocks, none of them ticking. And when Claire mentioned the mannequin, Elspeth didn't bat an eye. Instead, she turned, as if hearing something only she could hear. Then whispered, "The mannequin always returns to its mirror." Claire's skin prickled. What mirror? But Elspeth only cackled softly, eyes far away. It doesn't like to be separated, dear. They say it's just wood and glaze and plaster. But don't let it fool you. It's memory. That's what it's made of. Memory that no one wants to carry. Claire pressed for more. Names, stories, anything. But Elspeth just began humming tunelessly, rocking slowly in her chair. Back in her apartment, Claire began inspecting every mirror, every reflective surface. None seemed odd, until she noticed the tall standing mirror in the hallway was bolted to the floor. Not fixed. Bolted. As though someone was afraid it might move. The mannequin, now once again returned to the closet, stood slightly closer to the doorway. Its cracked face was tilted just so, perfectly aligned with the hallway mirror's line of sight. Claire stared at it for a long time that night. And for the first time, she thought it might be staring back. The dream started slowly at first, so subtle that Claire dismissed them as the product of too much stress. But then, like a storm gathering on the horizon, they began to intensify. They were never the same, but they always had the same thread running through them. A violent, uncontrollable fire, the piercing screams of a child, the acrid taste of smoke in her mouth, and always the eyes of a woman, distant, angry, full of blame. One night, Claire woke up drenched in sweat, her heart thudding, her limbs locked in a vice of terror. She had no idea how long she'd been thrashing, but the sun was already rising, casting weak, gray light through the blinds. For a moment, she just lay there, eyes wide open, listening to the eerie silence of her apartment. Then she noticed the bruises. There were small, finger-like indentations on her arms, dark purple marks where something, or someone, had held her too tightly. They weren't from her nightmares. She was certain of that. She had never touched herself like that. But there was no one else in the apartment. No one who could have done it. Was she sleepwalking? Was she somehow injuring herself in the night? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense anymore. The following day, she went to the attic. She needed to clear her mind, find something concrete to focus on, something that didn't involve the mannequin or the haunting sensation that the walls of her apartment were closing in on her. The attic was cold and dim, dust motes swirling in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the small window. Old boxes lined the walls, filled with forgotten relics of past tenants. She rifled through them, old books, yellowed papers, clothing, photographs, until one old, leather-bound photo album caught her attention. It was labeled in faded ink, Evelyn Hartman. Her hand froze. She didn't know why, but her stomach lurched. The name didn't sound familiar, but something inside her, something deep down, told her that it should. She opened it, carefully, as if afraid of what she might find. And there, on the first page, was a photograph of a young girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old. She was standing in front of a small house, smiling brightly, with a doll clutched tightly in her arms. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The girl's face was hers. The hair, the eyes, the shape of the face, it was her. The girl in the photo was her, but it wasn't. It was a version of herself that didn't exist. A version of herself that had never been. Underneath the photo, someone had written a name. Evelyn Hartman. The name felt like a phantom, brushing against the back of her mind, just out of reach. Claire flipped through the album, each picture revealing fragments of a life she didn't remember living. There she was again, this time in a different house, standing with a woman Claire didn't recognize but somehow knew. Her mother? She couldn't explain why, but the connection felt undeniable. There were more pictures, snapshots of a family that no longer existed. A mother, a father, a child named Evelyn. Her hands began to shake as she flipped to the last picture in the album. It was a photograph of a house burning, the flames licking at the windows, and ominous black smoke curling into the sky. A fire she didn't remember. A fire that she didn't belong to. The last page was marked with one final note, scrawled hastily in what looked like smeared ink. Evelyn Hartman is dead. She died in a fire. Claire is her replacement. The world around her began to spin. Claire slammed the album shut, her breathing quick and shallow. She could feel the walls pressing in on her. She felt as though the floor beneath her was about to give way, like the entire apartment, the whole town, was shifting around her, closing in like a trap. How could this be real? How could she not remember any of this? And then, as if her body knew before her mind could catch up, her gaze fell to the attic's far corner. The full-length mirror, covered in a dusty sheet. The mannequin in her closet was staring back at her. Not through the closet door, through the reflection. She blinked, disoriented. The mirror was still covered in dust, but the air around it shimmered with a strange heat. For a moment, she thought she saw the mannequin's eyes, those cracked, lifeless eyes, shift. Its head tilted to one side. And just as quickly, the image of the mannequin vanished, leaving only her own reflection staring back. Claire's chest tightened as realization hit her like a wave. She wasn't just seeing the mannequin in the closet, she was seeing it in the mirror. The same mirror Elspeth had mentioned. The one where the mannequin always returns. The realization burned like acid. She wasn't just being haunted by a figure from her nightmares. It was part of her. It had always been there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for her to remember. And that was the moment she knew. The mannequin wasn't a stranger. It was her. Claire could feel the weight of the moment in her bones. The house, the apartment, everything was shifting. Her mind was fractured, and each new discovery seemed to chip away at whatever stability she had left. She couldn't let the mannequins, the fire, the strange dreams define her. Not yet. Not while there was still something to uncover. Mrs. Redford, Claire's ever-watchful landlord, had always been a peculiar woman. Too quiet, too attentive, with eyes that seemed to linger just a little longer than was normal. And after everything Claire had seen and experienced, Mrs. Redford's behavior felt like another clue, another piece of the puzzle. So, Claire decided to confront it. The key to the office was where it had always been, tucked behind a fake plant in the hallway. As she slipped the key into the lock, Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if she could feel Mrs. Redford's watchful gaze, even from behind the closed door. Inside, the office was neat, almost sterile. The walls were lined with faded photographs of past tenants, and the desk sat neatly organized with paperwork stacked in meticulous piles. But the most important thing Claire needed was on the far side of the room, behind a small wooden filing cabinet. There, tucked away in a drawer she wasn't sure Mrs. Redford even knew about, was a leather-bound ledger. It had an ancient feel to it, its pages yellowed with age, its corners worn from years of use. She opened it carefully, flipping through the thin pages. At first, it looked like a standard list of tenants, names, dates of entry, rent payments. But as she turned the pages, the names started to repeat. 4 tenants had lived in apartment 4B, and every one of them had disappeared without a trace. Her pulse quickened. The first name, Elizabeth Hawthorne, last seen in 1978. Beneath her name was a small note, reported missing after seeing Mannequin. Next, Andrew Fennell, 1982. Another note, vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle. Then, Miriam Green, 1985. A chilling note, said the Mannequin was following her. Never seen again. And the final name, Claire Evelyn Hartman, 1991. Her breath caught in her throat. The last name was hers, the name she thought she had been running from. But the date was impossible. She had only been a child in 1991. Claire's mind reeled. The truth was seeping into her consciousness, like dark ink blotting out the page. Each name, each entry, told a story of the same disturbing pattern. All had lived in apartment 4B, and all had vanished. All had reported the same thing, a mannequin. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page to the next. But this time, it wasn't a name that caught her attention. It was the final entry under Claire Evelyn Hartman. A simple, ominous note, scrawled in the same handwriting as the others. She never left. She is the mannequin. Claire felt as though the room was closing in around her. She is the mannequin. The words echoed in her ears like a siren's wail. Her mind scrambled for answers. Was she the mannequin? Or was the mannequin trying to become her? She scanned the ledger for any clues, any mention of the fire, of her past life, of anything that could explain what had happened, what was happening. But there was nothing. The ledger ended abruptly. There was no mention of what happened to the tenants after the disappearances. The room felt colder now, as though the very air was thick with dread. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for her. Suddenly, a sound from behind her. Claire spun around, but there was no one in the room. Only the faint sound of a door creaking open. Her breath hitched. She turned back to the ledger, but before she could focus on it any longer, the door behind her clicked close. Claire's heart raced. She wasn't alone. Mrs. Redford stood in the doorway, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. Her gaze was steady, cold, like a person who had long ago stopped caring to conceal their intentions. I see you found my little collection, Mrs. Redford said, her voice a low, almost soothing murmur. You really should have left well enough alone, Claire. Claire's chest tightened as the words settled in. The pieces were falling into place. Mrs. Redford knew. She knew everything. I can't let you leave now, Mrs. Redford continued. You're part of the cycle. You've always been. The word cycle rang in Claire's ears like a death knell. Before Claire could speak, Mrs. Redford stepped closer, her presence suffocating, as though the room itself was folding in on her. She placed a cold hand on Claire's shoulder. The mannequin always returns to its mirror, she whispered, her breath hot against Claire's ear. Claire's world tilted. I don't understand, Claire gasped, her voice breaking. What do you mean? Mrs. Redford smiled, a thin, predatory smile. You will. You just have to remember. The world around Claire started to blur as Mrs. Redford's words, soft but damning, echoed in her mind. The mannequin wasn't just a specter of the past. It was part of her. She had always been part of it. The fire, the missing tenants, the mannequin, it was all connected. And now, Claire had no choice but to face the dark truth that had been buried for so long. The apartment had never been quiet in the way it was now. Since Claire had discovered the ledger, the air felt thick with a kind of tension, a palpable sense of things shifting just beneath the surface. Every corner seemed to whisper her name, Every creak of the floorboards seemed to draw her attention to something she couldn't quite grasp. But the mannequin. The mannequin had only grown more unnerving. It wasn't the same as before. When Claire had first found it in the closet, it had been motionless, as if it were frozen in time, waiting to be discovered. But now, it felt alive. Not in the way that it moved. No, it was far too methodical for that. But in the way it seemed to shift ever so slightly with every passing hour. The posture was never the same. The crack in its porcelain face, which had appeared only the night before, had deepened overnight. At night, Claire would hear it creaking, shifting, like the slow turn of a hand on a clock, marking the passing of some invisible moment. She couldn't stand the thought of it being in the same room with her, so she had tried to banish it. She'd thrown it into the trash, dragged it to the beach and buried it in the sand, even smashed it against the walls of the alley. But each time, it had returned. And each time, it had returned different. It wasn't until one evening, after another long day of fruitless searches for answers, that Claire realized the mannequin wasn't just coming back to her. It was evolving. She sat on her couch, the low light from the kitchen lamp casting long shadows in the corners of the room. The air felt strange tonight, oppressive, thick with the sound of her breath. She was still holding the ledger, rereading Mrs. Redford's cryptic words over and over again. "You're part of the cycle. You've always been." But the words couldn't settle. Not with the mannequin now in the kitchen, standing perfectly still, its head turned slightly to the left, eyes fixed on her. She blinked, shaking her head. Had she moved it there? No, she hadn't. She could have sworn she'd left it in the closet when she'd gone to bed last night. But there it was, standing at the threshold of the kitchen, where the light caught it just enough to send a cold shiver down her spine. The mannequin's face, cracked and worn, seemed to stare directly at her, the doll in its arms, still charred, positioned as if it were reaching out toward her. Something about its eyes, the way the porcelain shimmered in the dim light, made her feel watched. Her heart raced as the silence grew unbearable. She stood slowly, unable to look away from the mannequin. Each step she took seemed to make the room stretch farther, as if she were walking through a fog, every breath colder than the last. She grabbed her phone from the counter and hit the record button. Claire sat down on the couch, keeping her eyes fixed on the mannequin as the camera began to roll. With her heart hammering in her chest, she tried to steady her hand. The phone's red light blinked steadily as it recorded, capturing the unnatural stillness of the room. A minute passed. 2 minutes. Then, the creak. It was barely audible, but it was there, like the sound of a chair being shifted ever so slowly. Claire's pulse spiked. She hadn't moved. The mannequin hadn't moved, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. She watched, breathless, as the mannequin's head turned ever so slightly, just enough for its eyes to meet hers through the lens of the phone. Claire's hands trembled, her vision blurring. What was happening? Why was it watching her? And then the real horror set in. Through the camera's lens, Claire saw something she couldn't comprehend. The mannequin's mouth twitched. A slight shift, imperceptible to the naked eye, but there, like the faintest breath escaping from its lips. She gasped and dropped the phone, clutching her chest. She stood up, moving toward the mannequin with an unsteady step. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to leave, to never look at it again. But she couldn't. Claire reached out, trembling as she touched the cold, smooth surface of its porcelain hand. Suddenly, the floorboards behind her groaned, and she spun around. The mannequin wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It was in the hallway, standing in the doorway of her bedroom. Her heart stopped. Claire backed away, unable to comprehend how it had moved so quickly. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the drawer, and held it out, her hand shaking uncontrollably. She moved cautiously down the hallway, but the closer she got to her bedroom door, the heavier the air became, as though the weight of the mannequin's presence grew with every step she took. And then she saw it. It was gone. The mannequin wasn't in the doorway anymore. The hallway was empty. Claire's breath hitched. She moved into the bedroom, cautiously at first, then more urgently. Her mind was spinning with the possibilities. Was it still in the house? Was she losing her mind? It was in the closet. She slammed open the door, the light inside flickering. Nothing. There was no mannequin. The closet was bare. But as Claire exhaled, feeling the briefest moment of relief, a cold hand clamped around her wrist. She screamed. It wasn't the mannequin. It was Mrs. Redford. Her landlord's grip was iron tight, her eyes wide and wild, as though she'd been waiting for this exact moment. You shouldn't have done this, Mrs. Redford hissed. Now you've seen too much. You're in the cycle now. It's too late for you. Claire tried to pull away, but Mrs. Redford only gripped her harder. You don't know what you've done, she whispered, her voice trembling with something darker. You're not just in this cycle. You are the cycle. And just as Claire thought she might break free, the door slammed shut behind them, and the faintest sound of cracking porcelain echoed through the apartment. The mannequin was back, but this time, it wasn't in the closet. It was behind her. The apartment was suffocating in its silence. Claire sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at the yellowed pages of an old, cracked journal. Her mind, however, was far from still. Mrs. Redford's cryptic words, "The cycle, you are the cycle," echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. The mannequin was more than an eerie object in her apartment. It was a messenger, a harbinger, perhaps even a jailer. And yet, the longer she thought about it, the more she realized the mannequin wasn't just linked to the past, it was intricately tied to her. The revelation had hit her hard. She wasn't just in the cycle. She was the cycle. The mannequin had been watching her from the very start, not just as an observer, but as a part of her. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this was all somehow connected to someone or something she had lost. Someone she couldn't remember. That night, sleep eluded her as memories flickered and twisted in her mind like the shadows cast by the dim light. A child's laughter, the faint smell of smoke, and the sensation of being together with someone. But who? The images vanished before she could place them, replaced by that awful, gnawing emptiness. In a desperate attempt to find some semblance of peace, Claire set the journal aside and headed for the attic. The house creaked beneath her feet as she climbed the rickety ladder, the musty air filling her lungs as she reached the top. The attic was small, dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Boxes were scattered around, some of them taped shut, others half open, revealing old furniture, knick-knacks, and piles of forgotten memories. She wasn't sure what she was searching for, but her instincts pushed her forward. Her fingers brushed against the dusty boxes as she rummaged, finally coming upon an old photo album shoved in the back of a wooden chest. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Claire hesitated for a moment, then flipped it open. The first picture was of a little girl, her standing with a wide smile in front of a small, two-story house. The picture was taken years ago, but there was something familiar about the little girl's eyes. Her face. It was her. But beneath the photo, the name written in elegant script wasn't Claire. It was Evelyn. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She turned the page, heart pounding in her chest. There were more pictures, more images of her as a child. Only, every one of them was signed with the name Evelyn Hartman. She flipped through the album feverishly. Page after page, image after image. Each one was her, but none of them were her. They were someone else entirely. There was a photo of her and another girl, smiling, playing together, holding hands. The girl's face was blurred, indistinct, but Claire could tell they were twins. The girl had the same wide smile, the same deep eyes, the same face, but her hair was a little darker, her expression a little different. And then Claire found the photograph that stopped her cold. It was a school photo, dated 1996, the year she would have been 6 years old. The image showed two little girls in matching outfits, one with short, dark hair, the other with long, light brown locks. They were standing together, arms around each other, looking happy and full of life. But the name under the photo wasn't Claire or Evelyn. It was Alara. She couldn't breathe. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She was staring at a photograph of someone she didn't recognize, but knew in her bones. She was staring at her twin sister. But how could that be? She had no memory of a sister. She had no memory of Alara. The name felt foreign, but it also felt like something had cracked open inside her, as if a door had swung open, revealing a part of her life she'd been denied. She sat down hard on the floor, the album slipping from her hands, her mind racing. Elara? The name clung to her thoughts like a shadow. But if she had a twin, where was she now? Why hadn't she ever been told about Elara? As Claire dug deeper into the album, she found more haunting evidence of a life she couldn't remember. A report card with a name she didn't recognize, Evelyn Hartman. Pictures of a house in flames. A charred, blackened outline that had once been a family home. And a final, chilling note in the back of the album. Elara Hartman, deceased, 1996, fire. Claire's hands trembled as she pulled the note from the album and held it in front of her breath coming in shallow gasps. The words seared themselves into her mind. Elara Hartman, deceased. A memory flickered, blurred, fuzzy, but undeniable. Flames, crackling in the distance. A high-pitched scream. Her scream. A child's scream. Suddenly, it all came rushing back in fragments. The fire, the smoke, the feeling of her hand reaching out to save someone she loved. A child. A twin. Elara. But Elara was dead. The fire had taken her. She had died in the flames. She had died. So why did Claire feel as if a part of her was still missing? In a whirlwind of confusion and terror, Claire stumbled back to her bedroom. Her mind raced with the revelation Elara never died. The fire hadn't killed her. She was trapped. It all started to make sense. The mannequin, the doll, the haunting presence. It wasn't just a curse. It wasn't just a ghost. It was Elara. She had to find out more. Claire couldn't ignore the truth any longer. But there was someone else, someone Claire had never heard of before, who knew the truth. A psychic. One who had warned her about the mannequin long before she ever came to this apartment. Claire had to find her. She had to uncover what really happened the night of the fire, what had really happened to Elara. Because if she didn't, the mannequin would find her, and it wouldn't let her go. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that everything was closing in on her. The truth about Elara, the mannequin, the fire, it was all too much to process. The walls of her apartment felt like they were caving in, and the air was thick with dread. She had to leave, but where would she go? What would she do? Her thoughts kept returning to one thing: the psychic. The woman who had warned her before she even understood the gravity of the situation. She had to find her. If anyone knew what was really happening, it was the psychic. Claire grabbed her coat and left the apartment, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The street outside was quiet, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. It was late, but Claire couldn't wait any longer. She had to know. The psychic shop wasn't far, just a few blocks down the road, tucked between two aging storefronts. Claire had passed it countless times before, never giving it a second thought. But tonight, it was the only place she could turn. The shop sign hung crookedly above the door, its faded letters reading, Mystic's Touch. The glass door creaked as Claire pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit space. The scent of incense and sage filled her nostrils, and soft, haunting music drifted from somewhere deep within the shop. An elderly woman with wispy white hair sat at a table near the back of the room, her gnarled hands resting on a crystal ball. Her eyes were closed, but as soon as Claire stepped inside, the woman opened them, and Claire felt an icy chill run down her spine. "You've come for answers," the woman said, her voice low and raspy. "I knew you would." Claire's breath caught in her throat. It was as though the woman had been expecting her. "I need help," Claire said, her voice shaking. "I don't understand what's happening." "The mannequin, I think it's connected to my twin sister, Elara." The psychic held up a hand, silencing Claire. "I know," she said softly. "I've been watching you." Claire felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? How do you know all this?" The psychic's eyes gleamed with an unsettling knowledge. Elara's spirit never left. She's trapped, bound to the earth by the fire. But she isn't the only one. Claire's mind raced. "What do you mean, not the only one? Who else is trapped?" The psychic closed her eyes again, breathing deeply as if centering herself. "The mannequin. It's not just a vessel for Elara's spirit. It's something older, something darker. a reflection of your own soul, a piece of you that refuses to move on. Claire stared at the woman, trying to process her words. What do I need to do? She asked urgently. How can I help her? The psychic shook her head slowly, her expression somber. You can't help her. Not yet. The fire didn't just take Alara. It took part of you, too. That's why the mannequin is moving. It's trying to force you to remember. The words were like ice in Claire's veins. Remember what? The psychic's gaze softened, and she leaned forward, her eyes locking with Claire's. The truth. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a sacrifice. A bargain made long ago. Your family, your ancestors, they made a deal to keep something locked away. But the fire broke the seal. Now, it's trying to break free. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. What are you saying? That the fire? It was planned? The psychic nodded, her hands trembling slightly. Yes. Your family has been keeping a secret for generations. A pact made with an ancient force. Something that should never have been disturbed. Elara. She was meant to be a sacrifice, a key to that force. Claire recoiled, her stomach churning. No, that can't be true. Elara was just a child. She didn't deserve that. The psychic's expression was full of sorrow. I'm afraid it's true. Elara's death was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The fire released something dark, something powerful. And now it's hunting you. Claire's thoughts were swirling. The fire, Elara, the mannequin, it was all connected. But how could she stop it? How could she undo something that had been set in motion so long ago? The mannequin, the psychic continued, her voice growing more urgent, is the manifestation of that force. It's been waiting, and it's drawing you closer. You are the key, Claire. You need to face the truth before it consumes you. Claire swallowed hard, her mind racing. How do I face the truth? How do I stop it? The psychic reached out and placed a trembling hand on Claire's. You must confront the past. You need to go back to the fire, to the place where it all began. The answers are there. But be warned, what you find may not be what you expect. The spirit of Elara is not the only one seeking redemption. Claire's heart sank. You mean, someone else is trapped? The psychic nodded slowly. There are always consequences. And not all spirits wish to be freed. Claire stood up, her legs unsteady. She had to go to the fire. She had to face the past. But she wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. Before she left, the psychic's voice stopped her. One last thing, she said softly. You're not alone in this, Claire. Your sister is still with you. She's trying to guide you. Don't ignore the signs. Claire's blood ran cold as she left the shop, the psychic's words echoing in her mind. Elara's spirit isn't the only one trying to guide you. As she walked back through the streets, her thoughts raced. She needed to go back to the house. Back to where the fire had taken everything from her. But was she ready to face the truth? Was she ready to confront the darkness that had been waiting for her all these years? She didn't have a choice. The mannequin was waiting, and it wasn't going to let her go until she found the answers. The weight of the psychic's words pressed heavily on Claire's chest, as though 1,000 unseen hands were pushing her down. She had always believed that the fire had stolen everything from her, the memories, the innocence, the life she could have had. But now, she was learning that perhaps it had stolen more than she'd realized. It had stolen her identity. For days, she couldn't shake the growing sense that something inside her was wrong. The truth about Elara and the mannequin had cracked open a door that Claire wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. But there was no turning back. Every moment she stayed in this apartment, surrounded by whispers and shadows, made it harder to ignore the reality that was staring her in the face. She returned to the apartment, her mind a blur of questions. The mannequin was silent now, still. But the presence it left behind was heavy, oppressive. Claire couldn't look at it without feeling the gnawing pull of something ancient, something that refused to be forgotten. Elara. Claire reached for the old journal she had found earlier, the one that had once belonged to Mrs. Redford. She had skimmed through it hastily before, but now the weight of the pages felt different. She sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the worn, yellowing pages. There, on the last page, A name she didn't recognize jumped out at her. Evelyn Hartman. She froze. Evelyn Hartman? The name seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. Her breath caught as her eyes scanned the rest of the journal entry, her stomach twisting in knots. It described her. Claire Evelyn Hartman, born to Jacob and Margaret Hartman. Twin sister, Elora Hartman, tragically lost in the fire. Evelyn survived, though the memory was wiped clean. Reborn under a new name. Claire recoiled, her heart pounding as the words danced before her eyes. Evelyn. That was her name. She was Evelyn. The blood drained from her face as the revelation struck her like a lightning bolt. She wasn't Claire. She was Evelyn. She had never been Claire. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew about herself, was a lie. She wasn't just running from her past. She was running from herself. Her hands shook violently as she closed the journal. The name Evelyn had always felt distant, like a ghost of a memory she couldn't catch. But now it fit. Now, it made sense. A surge of panic gripped her chest as the walls of the apartment seemed to close in. She wasn't Claire. She had never been Claire. Evelyn had died in the fire. But somehow, she had been reborn, given a new name, a new identity. Why? Who had done this to her? Why had she been erased? Suddenly, the air felt too thick, too suffocating. She needed air. She needed answers. Claire rushed out of the apartment, her thoughts spiraling. Her steps were heavy as she walked toward Mrs. Redford's office, her mind racing with possibilities. Was the landlord in on it? Had she been a part of the plan? The door to Mrs. Redford's office was locked. Claire banged on it furiously, her hands slapping against the wood as her frustration mounted. She needed to know the truth. She had to confront the woman who had watched her from the shadows, who had allowed her to live a lie for all these years. Finally, the door creaked open. Mrs. Redford stood in the doorway, her face calm, almost serene, as if she'd been expecting Claire. Her eyes flickered with a brief flash of recognition before she masked it with a polite smile. Claire, Mrs. Redford said, her voice smooth. Or should I say, Evelyn? The name was a whisper, barely audible, but it hit Claire like a slap to the face. Mrs. Redford knew. She had always known. Why didn't you tell me? Claire demanded, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me who I really am? Mrs. Redford's gaze softened, but there was no pity in her eyes, only a cold understanding. You were never meant to remember, Evelyn. It was for your own protection. Protection? Claire's voice cracked. From what? From who? Who did this to me? The fire, Mrs. Redford replied, her tone almost regretful. Your parents made a choice. They decided to wipe your memories, to give you a new life. It wasn't just to protect you, it was to protect everyone else. Claire shook her head violently, as if trying to shake away the truth that seemed to pour from Mrs. Redford's lips. You're lying. You're lying to me. I'm not lying, Mrs. Redford said quietly. I'm trying to help you. You were always meant to be Evelyn, but the spirit, the force inside you, it won't rest until it can complete what was started. That's why you've been drawn back here. That's why the mannequin is calling you. The truth hit Claire like a wave. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was the key to something far darker. She had been erased from existence, replaced by a new identity to hide her from the truth. But the past had a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. Evelyn, Mrs. Redford repeated softly, as if the name were a prayer. You need to face the truth, or it will consume you. The mannequin is part of that truth. It was never about Elora. It was about you. The words echoed in Claire's mind, drowning out all other thoughts. It was always about her. She stumbled back from Mrs. Redford's office, her mind reeling with the weight of the revelation. She wasn't Claire. She was Evelyn. And if she was going to survive, if she was going to stop the mannequin from completing whatever twisted ritual it was preparing, she would have to confront the truth. But confronting the truth meant accepting a reality she wasn't sure she was ready for. The fact that she had never truly been herself at all. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of an old clock on the wall. But Claire couldn't escape the sound of her own heartbeat, each thud echoing like a drum, as she stared at the mannequin. It stood motionless in the corner of her closet, but somehow it felt more alive than ever before. The air in the room had thickened, as though something was pressing down on her chest, a weight she couldn't shake. The memories, the truth, had shattered her sense of self. She wasn't Claire. She wasn't even Evelyn. She was a vessel, a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before she had arrived at this coastal town. The mannequin's eyes followed her as she walked across the room, but she couldn't look away. It wasn't just the mannequin anymore. It was her, or at least, it was part of her. The pieces of the puzzle had clicked into place, and what remained was a horrifying reality that she had never imagined. As Claire stood before it, she could feel the presence of something, someone, inside it. The mannequin had always been more than a lifeless object. It had been waiting for her, waiting for the moment when she would remember. Evelyn. The name whispered through her mind like a ghost, and she almost recoiled at the sound. But the truth was undeniable. The mannequin was calling her home, pulling her back to something dark and ancient, something that had never really been buried at all. A voice interrupted her thoughts, cutting through the stillness of the apartment. It was Mrs. Redford, standing in the doorway, her eyes gleaming with something Claire couldn't place, regret, maybe, or something darker. "It's time," Mrs. Redford said, her voice barely a whisper. "You know what must be done." Claire's heart raced. She could feel it now, the pull of the mannequin, the pull of her past, the pull of Evelyn. She had always known that she wasn't just running from her past. She was running from the ritual, from the curse that had followed her throughout her life. "The fire didn't kill you, Evelyn," Mrs. Redford continued, her eyes fixed on Claire with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You killed yourself. You abandoned your sister. You abandoned your life. And now, the time has come to reclaim it." Claire's blood ran cold. "Reclaim it?" "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I can't. I can't do this." But Mrs. Redford stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You don't have a choice. The mannequin is the key. It has always been the key. It will return you to your rightful self. It will return Evelyn." The room felt as though it were closing in on Claire, suffocating her. She could hear the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, the whisper of air that wasn't there. The mannequin's eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, seemed to glimmer with a dark knowing. It had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to remember. She took a hesitant step toward it, her mind racing. The memories, the fire, the child's scream, the phantom presence of her sister. They all swirled together in a dizzying whirlpool, threatening to consume her. But as Claire reached for the mannequin, a horrifying thought struck her. The mannequin wasn't Evelyn. It was someone else. Someone still alive. Someone who had never died. The mannequin's head tilted ever so slightly, as though it had heard her thoughts. And then, with a sound that could only be described as the faintest whisper, the mannequin's lips parted. But the voice that came from it was not her own. "I'm coming for you, Evelyn." The words were a promise. A threat. And Claire realized, too late, that the mannequin was not the vessel that had trapped her sister's spirit. It was the vessel that had always been meant for her. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The mannequin, the fire, the erased memories, everything had been leading her to this point. It was never about Alara. It was about her, Claire, or rather, Evelyn. And the only way to break the cycle was to accept the truth. The mannequin didn't want her to remember. It wanted her to return. The air shifted around Claire, becoming heavy, thick with something ancient and powerful. She felt the floor beneath her begin to tremble, and she stumbled back as the walls of the apartment seemed to close in. The room was no longer just an apartment. It was a temple, a place of ritual, a place where her past was set to be reclaimed. As Claire backed away, her gaze locked on Mrs. Redford, whose eyes were now filled with a strange hunger. The landlord wasn't just a witness to this twisted cycle. She was a participant. "You can't escape this, Evelyn," Mrs. Redford said, her voice no longer calm, but laced with something darker, more possessive. "You will be reborn. You will become who you were always meant to be." Claire's pulse thundered in her ears as she took one final step back. She had only moments left before the ritual would be complete. The mannequin, the true vessel, was waiting, and she had a choice to make. Remember and reclaim your true identity, or reject the past and lose yourself forever. She could feel the truth crashing down on her. The mannequin wasn't just a lifeless object, it was the harbinger of her own doom. If she gave in, she would be lost forever. If she rejected it, she would still be lost, but in a different way. Suddenly, the mannequin's eyes glowed, the faintest hint of light flickering within them. It was time. With a final, desperate cry, Claire reached for the mannequin, but before her fingers could touch its cold, porcelain skin, the apartment exploded in a blinding flash of light. And then, nothing. The silence was deafening.